Hi everybody, today's lecture is on European feudalism. The feudal system, not sure if you've heard much about this in previous history classes or not. Here's a definition. So it's defined as a set of reciprocal legal and military obligations among the warrior nobility. And that's when it existed in Europe from the 9th to the 15th century. Although I'll say people who are really into this topic, people who specialize in it, do argue a bit as to when it actually started and when it actually ended and what actually made up it. But yeah, let me explain this definition here a bit. So it says a set of reciprocal legal and military obligations. So yeah, this graphic here on the right shows you a sort of really simplified version of the different levels of this society. So you've got down here at the bottom, we have these peasants or serfs. A serf is essentially a peasant who's tied to the land, as in they have to stay on the land where they were born. The next level up, we have the knights here. Above them, at the next level, you have the church and the lords or the aristocrats or the people who are considered below the king, but they're at the level of these very important, very wealthy, very exclusive families. And then, of course, the king is up there at the top. It might be more accurate in most of Europe in this time too to actually put an image of God above the king. As we'll see later on in this lecture, religion was incredibly important to this system, and they thought that God was sort of the guarantor of this whole system. So if this person got to be king, these people got to be rich, and the people at the bottom were very, very poor, they thought quite strongly it's because God wanted it to be that way. God is the creator of everything, and then they had an idea that God was the sort of like the puppet master controlling everyone, controlling what happened to people and controlling people's behavior. This isn't an idea of like free will. It's more of a controlled universe. So yeah, when the definition says it's a set of reciprocal legal and military obligations among the warrior nobility, one way to understand that would be to say that almost everybody in this society had rights and obligations and responsibilities. So the peasants at the very bottom, they have the responsibility to work and produce food and then give a portion of that food they produce to the people who own the land, the people above them in this structure. The knights, the warriors in the society had an obligation to protect the serfs, to protect those peasants. The peasants were supposed to have protection for their work. Um, these people got more food. They got taken care of better than the people below them, but they had obligations to those above them. They pledged these oaths to the people above them, and they had to basically do what they were told. They had to, when called upon, show up to fight for whoever they had pledged their loyalty to. And then, yeah, the next level up, it works in a similar way. They have the responsibility to take care of those below them, to pay them, to give them land in some cases, to give them wealth. Um, and then in return, these knights would fight for them when asked to do so. And then the relationship between the lords and the kings, very similar. The king is supposed to protect and take care of and show favor to the lords that have pledged loyalty or fealty to them. But then the lords are supposed to come when called and provide taxes, provide military support, provide whatever the king needs, essentially. So yeah, I mentioned this a minute ago, these feudal oaths. So this is a picture of, I'm not exactly sure when this is from, but you see one, they both look like kings, one king sort of bowing before another. That's the image I'm using for this here. So this, here we go. So this is a primary source. These are feudal oaths, oaths of fidelity. Um, these, as it says, these are two typical oaths of fidelity. So this first one says, it's an Anglo-Saxon form of commendation, and it says, thus shall one take the oath of fidelity. By the Lord before whom this sanctuary is holy, I will to end be true and faithful, and love all which he loves, and shun all which he shuns, according to the laws of God and the order of the world. Nor will I ever with will or action, through word or deed, do anything which is unpleasing to him, on condition that he will hold to me as I shall deserve it, and that he will perform everything as it was in our agreement, when I submitted myself to him and chose his will. So yeah, this is somebody of a lower level pledging themselves to someone above them. Things I want to point out, the idea that it's pledged before the Lord in a sanctuary. So again, I think God is the guarantor of this system. God will oversee all of this and make everybody hold to their word. And basically it says, I will do whatever you ask me to do when I promised you myself, when I promised my word, when I gave my word that I would be loyal to you. And I have to do that unless you don't live up to your end of the bargain. So again, it's this contract almost, this bargain that's made. The second piece down here, this is from the 7th century. It says the acceptance of an Antrustion. This is someone who's higher up, sort of acknowledging and accepting the pledge made by somebody below him. So it says, it is right that those who offer to us unbroken fidelity shall be protected by our aid. And since such and such a faithful one of ours, by the favor of God, coming here in our palace with his arms, has seen fit to swear trust and fidelity to us in our hand, therefore we decree and command by the present precept that for the future such and such above mentioned be counted with the number of Antrustians. And if anyone perchance should presume to kill him, let him know that he will be judged guilty of his vergild of 600 shillings. So basically it's saying, hey, you're pledging yourself to me, I'm going to take care of you. And as long as you do what you said that you should do, that will happen. You will be taken care of. Again, God plays a really important role here. God's supposed to be the guarantor, the person who witnesses this contract and guarantees that it will be carried out. Then this last thing is really interesting too. It says, okay, yeah, I'm going to protect you. You've pledged your loyalty to me. You will be protected. But, things happen. If you are killed, I'll take care of you then, essentially, by seeking this vergild. Vergild, sometimes this is known as like blood money. It's essentially the idea that if someone is killed, you can collect money from that murderer or the killer. And that often is used as a way to settle disputes, to like keep people from starting a feud or some big war forming out of one particular killing. This is a little bit like what you might see in like a mob movie, or if you watch The Sopranos back in the day, or any of those sort of mob type situations where you have one family coming after another family, and usually at the end, after there's a lot of violence in those sort of films, they say like, all right, let's just sit down. And so we know you're mad because we killed this guy, and that guy killed one of ours. Why don't you just give him this money, give him the right to this trucking route, give him the right to this or that, and we'll just call it even. So that's what this is, this concept of vergild. Moving on here, a few more points. So it says early feudal Europe lacked centralized power. There are very few cities, few states. You had largely these agricultural estates run by local nobles, and they're farmed by dependent labor. Dependent labor, these are these serfs, these people who are obligated to do this farming and who are basically tied to the land. They are born, work, and die on the same plot of land. They're not really allowed to leave. They're not allowed to go farm somewhere else. They're not allowed to take on some other occupation. This is very much a caste system, similar to caste systems we've seen earlier. You're born into a level, and you have very little chance to leave that level. Let's see, the idea of lacking centralized power, what that's all about here is that the king is supposed to have the ultimate power, and that power is supposed to be guaranteed by God. But in a way, they lack the technology to really rule the entire kingdom, because they can't really force people to do things in the far reaches of their kingdom without a lot of cooperation. And so this is where this feudal system really works, because the king has these lords. The lords are given property, they're given wealth, they're given rights and privileges, they're given titles, and in return they have to do what the king says. So it works like this, really like a mob structure if you are into mob movies at all. The idea that you have these captains underneath you, and those captains do your bidding, and they make a lot of money, and they kick that money up to you. The feudal system was really a lot like that. But that power is decentralized because if you have a few of those lieutenants, a few of those captains, a few of those lords in this actual case, if they decide they don't want to go along with you, they want to go out on their own or support somebody else instead of you, that's really how the balance of power shifts. And in feudal Europe, that's often what happens. A few people would change sides, and then all of a sudden you have a regime change. So this is taken from not our textbook, but a different textbook. It says a new warrior aristocracy took weapons from the peasantry. The peasants are exploited by the warlords. And this quote says that the moment the farmers lost their right to carry arms, they were no longer free. They slipped back to being mere agricultural laborers. Each peasant was under the authority of a lord who controlled every detail of his or her life. This was the basis of the system of feudalism. This takes us back a little bit to the Bronze Age. that we studied very briefly. And the idea that really it's weapons, the monopoly on weapons that keeps the rich rich and keep the poor poor. We'll cover something like this when we look at Japan here coming up in the course, because in Japan, in feudal Japan, there's a similar thing that happens eventually, where the rich and the powerful declare that they have a monopoly on weapons, and they take the weapons away from everyone else. So this sort of just makes a lot of sense, right? If only the rich and powerful have weapons, it's really hard for the poor to rise up against them. So this is what I mentioned earlier. Here's an image of a knight praying. You can see all the crosses on him here. And it says, God is the foundation of everything. And they really believe that. They believe God basically controlled everything in the universe and really, in many ways, controlled our behavior. So there's this thing about the divine right of kings. This is simply the idea that kings are kings because God chose them to be kings. And the way we know that is because the king is a king. It's a real circular sort of logic thing there. It's like if God didn't want a king to be a king, he wouldn't be a king because God could do anything. And so, yeah, that's basically how that worked. And so when a king was in power, he would declare, I'm the king, and I'm the king because God wants me to be so. And if someone kills that king and takes over, that new king would argue, yes, well, obviously I was able to kill that last guy. That shows God wants me to be king. Interesting how that worked. There was vast social inequality, gender relations, the relationship between men and women. It's a little bit better here. We have all kinds of examples of women who have some sort of power in society. But definitely there isn't social equality or gender equality. But yet, interestingly, people thought, God is guaranteeing these things too. God wants women to be subservient to men. God wants the poor to be poor and the rich to be rich. All right, we're going to look at something really quickly here, or just a few images from this. There's this manuscript that we have called Talhofer's Medieval Fight Book. So Talhofer's book here, this is what it looks like. There's a PDF of it here, which I can link to. It's from 1459. It's 440 pages. We definitely don't have time to look at all of this, but and actually here it's loading slowly. A lot of it's all about combat. So he's teaching people how to be knights, essentially how to be warriors. You see some of these images I'm scrolling through rather quickly. I've got a few of them here in the lecture. It starts up again. Hold on. So here's one with some knights and some armor. Here's one teaching these people how to fight. And then a lot of this, we believe, is about judicial duels, which are also called trial by combat. And this was a way, a bit similar to something we might have seen in Hammurabi's Code, the idea that when we can't tell who's responsible for a crime or who's telling the truth when there's an accusation and who is not, they would have them fight to the death. The idea in this case that God would guarantee the innocent would survive and the guilty would die. So yeah, in this case, you'd say, hey, I don't know who's telling the truth and who's not. You two fight to the death, and we'll have the winner declared innocent because we know that's the way God would have wanted it to be. And so we've got these other really surprising images from this same book, this Talhofer's Fight Book from 1459. And if you look really closely, you can see that this is a man fighting a woman. And there is, I think actually I just have one image here, and I've got that video, which we probably won't have time to put in this lecture. I'll have to put it separately. But yeah, so you have this man fighting this woman. There's a whole bunch of series of these images in the book itself. The man's in a hole, the woman's not. They're both in these tightly fitting outfits with crosses painted on them, red crosses. And he's got this club, and she's got like a flail. It's like a rock, essentially, in a piece of cloth. And so these images sort of make clear that these two would fight, and perhaps fight to the death. And so what we think is perhaps this would be that sort of thing, a judicial duel, an occasion where a man would fight a woman. Really quickly to end on, and to sort of add a little bit more to how religious, perhaps extremely so, some of these people were. There was a tradition of religious relics. So when pieces of the body of a saint, items touched by a saint, items from the tomb of a saint, these things were thought to instantly heal people, to perform miracles perhaps, and in some cases to get you directly into heaven if you owned it, despite the fact that you lived a horrible, sinful life. And so not only was that a thing that people believed, but it was a thing that people often faked in order to take advantage of others. Here's an example of that. So there are these tales of relics. There are many works like this where it's a sort of medieval books that tell us about these relics and what happened with them. So this one is sort of exposing the industry of fraud that sprung up around these relics. So this one is written by this guy, Caesar Heisterbach. And it says, a certain knight loved most ardently the above-mentioned martyr St. Thomas of Canterbury. St. Thomas of Canterbury, yeah, he's a martyr, someone who died for his faith, and sought everywhere to obtain some relic of him. When a certain wily priest in whose house he was staying heard of this, he said to him, I have by me a bridle which St. Thomas used for a long time, and I have often experienced its virtues. So what he's doing is claiming, oh, I've got something, a bridle for a horse owned by St. Thomas, and if I give it to you, it's going to be really, really great. So it says, when the knight heard this and believed it, he joyfully paid the priest the money which the latter demanded and received the bridle with great devotion. So this wily priest has basically committed this fraud, right? He said, like, here, this is from St. Thomas, but it's not. It's not from St. Thomas. But this next paragraph, sort of like a twist in the story. It says, God truly, to whom nothing is impossible, wishing to reward the faith of the knight and for the honor of his martyr, deigned to work many miracles through the same bridle. The knight, seeing this, founded a church in honor of the martyr, and in it he placed as a relic the bridle of this most wicked priest.